Testing, testing, testing. Hi there guys, my name is Rohan Beve, and in today's video we are going to be talking about what is psychology. Now, in today's video we are going to be talking about what is psychology and the description of it. Okay, so as we know, us humans, okay, are a curious species, okay? We're curious human beings, okay? We like to think a lot, okay? And we're just curious on, for example, let's say, have you ever wondered on what is like your friend thinking about, or why is your dad doing that, okay? And you have all these questions about the human mind and itself, okay? Well, that's what psychology is. What psychology is, and its definition, is that it's basically explaining what's happening in your mind scientifically, okay? It's in a scientific way, okay? So what that basically means is basically it's careful research design, okay? And with this careful research design, we can basically, or psychologists can give out solid conclusions to answers. So for example, why are they doing this? Well, in psychology, you can find out said answer, okay? Now, the basic description of, or not description, but the basic definition of psychology is basically psychology is the scientific study of mental processes and behavior. So let's look at both of them. Okay, so let's first go at mental processes. So what mental process basically is it asks the question, what's going on inside your brain? So for example, you just thinking about something or imagining it. So basically something that you're doing that is not observable, okay? So imagining a fight, okay? Or just thinking about something in your mind that is non-observable, that is a mental process. And behavior is more or less the opposite of that. So it's basically why we're doing that, okay? So basically like what we're doing, something that we're doing like ourselves. For example, writing down something, okay? That's an example of a behavior, which is basically an action that is observable, okay? Now that's more or less the basic definition of psychology, but there are so many levels of, what you say, analyzing, okay, to this, okay? So what I mean by that is, you see, in order to understand the human mind in psychology, it takes many parts, okay? So what I mean by that is some psychologists study the brain itself. For example, you're doing something, okay? Just think up of an example. And with the study of the brain, it basically, the psychologist in charge of that is more or less basically saying that when we do this, all of this stuff is activated. So whenever we're thinking, that part of the thinking part of your brain activates, and what all hormones, and let's say when we're learning, which part of the brain actually develops and grows and more neurons are there. That's basically the study of the brain structure and function. There's some other psychologists also study the individual person itself, okay? So what the function of the person as basically a person itself. So what I mean by that is, let's say, why are we thinking that, right? And what are all the things they'll do? What is their behavior and stuff like that? Okay, that's what a psychologist does when they're studying an individual. And some psychologists study entire groups, okay, which basically impacts of social influences. So for example, you basically study like a whole family, okay, and what structures do they play in a scientific way. So the father does this, the mother does that, siblings and stuff like that, okay? And what do they do and how do they connect with each other? That's what a psychologist does to study with a group. Now that we have that, there are 4 main goals in psychology, okay? And these are the 4 main goals: description, explanation, prediction, and control, okay? These are the 4 goals of psychology. So let's put up an example, okay? Just think of whatever example you're thinking of. So let's say we take your example and put it through the first part, okay? So 1, description. So what is your example? So let's say maybe a condition, okay? So what is your condition? Describe that condition, okay? So what exactly is this condition, condition, okay? 2, explanation. So now we know what it is, but why does it happen? So it basically explains the background. So maybe your example only happens because of something that happened before, maybe trauma or stuff like that, okay? 3rd is prediction. So what that means is, when will these episodes happen, okay? So when can they occur and when can you predict when it can occur? So when can your example happen? Every now and then, okay? And the final part is control. So now we know what the thing is, okay? What does it do, okay? Why does it do that? And when does it do that? How do we control it? So that way, maybe if it's a good thing, we can make sure it continues more, or if it's a bad thing, how do we control said symptom and stop it? Now, those are more or less the 4 goals of psychology, okay? So again, let me say that's with your example. Let's say I put my example, okay? So let me think over here. How about depression, okay? So we put it through this, okay? First, we think of the description on what exactly is depression, okay? So now we know what depression is. We have to explain why does it happen, okay? Why does it happen? What's the background? Maybe because of some trauma or something happened with that individual or person, okay? Then 3, prediction. When will the next episode of depression happen again, and what causes it to trigger? And 4 is control. So how do we stop this depression, okay? And how do we stop that from ever happening again? Those are the 4 goals of psychology, and that's the full thing on what psychology is, okay? That was the definition, the levels of analysis, okay? And the 4 goals. And well, that's basically it. Thank you for watching this video, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.